Good afternoon, and thank you for making the time out of your busy schedule to attend this webinette. The University of Alberta Strategic Plan for EDI and Your Teaching Practice webinette number 5, Accessibility. Our webinar today is collaboratively facilitated by Dr. Joanne Weber and Tracy Hetman. Joe and Tracy, please introduce yourselves.
Hello, everyone. I am Dr. Joanne Weber. I'm the Canada Research Chair in Deaf Education. I work at the Faculty of Education, and I'm very honored to be involved today in the presentation. And you will just hear Tracy. That's the designated interpreter for my position. So you can't see her, you will be able to hear her. And she's just interpreting for us. She's not leading the presentation. So yeah, there you go, Everett.
I am Everett Igobwa, and my pronouns are he, him, and his. My role at CTL is Lead Educational Developer, Critical Pedagogies and Equity, Diversity and Inclusivity. The University of Alberta respectfully acknowledges that we are located on Treaty 6 territory, a traditional gathering place for diverse Indigenous peoples, including the Cree, Blackfoot, Métis, Nakota Sioux, Iroquois, Dene, Ojibwe, Anishinaabe, Inuit, and many others whose histories, languages, and cultures continue to influence our vibrant community. I will read out the access check adapted from the University of Toronto and borrowed from my colleague Mandy Penny, Lead Educational Developer, Digital Pedagogies and Writing across the curriculum. For transparency, we understand access to be a shared responsibility between everyone in this space. Our goal is to strive for an inclusive and accessible space that reduces the need for anyone to unwillingly disclose a disability or impairment for the purposes of gaining an accommodation. We want to be mindful about distinguishing between the formal accommodations, itself sometimes a difficult process to navigate, and access needs which we all bring to our spaces from a variety of social locations. In doing this work together, we strive to welcome disability and the changes it brings into our space. If you have an access need that we have not addressed, or you notice a barrier that doesn't directly impact your engagement, but may impact that of others, please feel free to bring it to our attention via whatever channel you prefer. This is webinet number 5 in a series of 8. Webinet number 1 was equity, number 2, diversity, number 3 was inclusivity, and number 4, reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. And the videos are on our CTL YouTube channel. Please review them, as these 4 EDI concepts are closely related with the other 3 remaining EDI principles. During this webinar, I will outline the 8 principles of the EDI strategic plan. Additionally, Dr. Joanne Weber will discuss accessibility in deaf education as it impacts learning and teaching. Our strategic plan is guided by 8 principles: reconciliation with Indigenous peoples, accessibility, intersectionality, equality substantive, diversity, equity, inclusion, and human rights. At CTL, we have developed teaching and learning associations for each of the 8 principles as follows. Equity is fair and just conditions in teaching and learning to allow students to realize their full potential. Diversity is multiple identities of students in our classrooms. Inclusion is valuing and nurturing the ideas, thoughts, perspectives, and backgrounds and identities of students. Human rights are fundamental rights in the classroom to be and belong as who we each are as whole people. Equality substantive is consciously addressing the range of conditions that deny equity to individual students and student demographics in the classroom. Conditions that create opportunities for identified disadvantaged students in the classroom. Intersectionality is the way that individual axes of oppression compound and interweave in who each person is in the classroom, and how these axes never exist separate from each other, but always interlocked. Accessibility is physical, pedagogical, and administrative structures designed and redesigned to foster, facilitate, and empower students' success. Reconciliation with Indigenous peoples means beginning in truth and moving toward the building and sustaining of respectful, responsible, and ethical relationships with Indigenous peoples and all those living across the nation we now call Canada. The University of Alberta Strategic Plan for EDI discusses accessibility as follows, and I quote, "Accessibility refers to the degree to which physical, pedagogical, and administrative structures of the University of Alberta are redesigned to enable the full, meaningful, and equitable engagement of all of the university's community members." Accessibility includes, but is much broader than ramped access to buildings. It also includes, for example, designing for physical, financial, sensory, social, and language level access. Whereas accommodation refers to making specific changes to support the full participation of an individual who has encountered barriers, an accessible campus is one that seeks proactively to reduce as many barriers as possible, while creating efficient and transparent processes for individuals to gain the accommodations they require and are entitled to by law, end quote. Dr. Joanne Weber will now discuss accessibility in deaf education. Welcome, Jo.
I'm starting my presentation by showing a pre-recorded video. It was done in NUJA, the NUJA Learning Management System, and that's one that we have here at the university. So I'm going to show you the video, how that system works and how it can change. I'm going to change it partway through. You'll see the different views that you can use that increases accessibility based on students in their own learning preferences. So I'll start by sharing my screen, and then I will also show you different views. Hello, I'm Joanne Weber, and I hold a Canada Research Chair in Deaf Education. My presentation today is titled "The Deaf Aesthetic in Online Higher Education, Accessibility for All." Before we get into the deaf aesthetic, I want to begin by reviewing the two main biosocial portals for processing information and learning. Deaf people, logically, are visuocentric. Input from the environment is received dominantly through vision. Input through hearing would be secondary. The processing structure is different for deaf people, as visual input is perceived as more of a gestalt. The information is taken in visually, all at once, and the most salient items are prioritized for processing. Hearing people tend to be audiocentric when processing information. Spoken language is perceived in a linear fashion, one word after the other. The structure of the incoming input is linear, as the words form sentences, and sentences are articulated in sequence.
The deaf aesthetic follows the structure of visual language. To incorporate the deaf aesthetic, the design must prioritize the visuocentric portal the way sign languages do. The last point I want to make is that the deaf aesthetic is often about what is pleasing and beautiful to deaf people. Presenters often think that providing ample visual resources serves the needs of visual learners. That might not be the case. Let's explore the difference between visual resources and the deaf aesthetic. Visual resources and digital texts may not be the accessibility fit that you think. These resources are often problematic for deaf and deafblind, deaf-low vision students. It's likely we have all come across poorly designed PowerPoint presentations. Slides that have varying sized fonts, multiple images, incomprehensible conceptual diagrams, slides so busy it's hard to decipher the point. The deaf aesthetic goes beyond providing visual resources. It also provides the learner enough time to process what is shown. The learner is given enough time to read the text on the slide. Enough time to study the images. And enough time to watch the interpreter relay the audio accompanying the slide. Depending on the density of the visual material presented, the student may need 10 to 30 seconds to process the slide. The deaf aesthetic design recognizes that, more than other learners, deaf and deafblind or low vision students are processing multiple inputs of visual information simultaneously. So back to our central question. Consider whether the deaf aesthetic I am introducing today can guide the development of digital materials in higher learning to benefit all students. The deaf aesthetic influences the layout of digital texts. The relationship between visual elements such as text, images, and the speaker are carefully thought through. The layout on the screen is pleasing, not haphazard. Deaf aesthetics is impacted by learning management systems and applications. The slide image on the left is produced in Prezi, which allows me as a speaker to be in the screen with my visuals. This is a pleasing aesthetic. The slide on the right is produced in Nuja. See how the visuals are split into two separate windows, forcing one's eyes to look uncomfortably at two different focal points. Providing ASL English interpreting really impacts the layout. At least half of the screen's real estate needs to be dedicated to the interpreter. This is necessary to be able to see the nuanced movements of the face, eyes, eyebrows, and mouth. All of these transmit linguistic information. Deaf aesthetics are shaped by the location of the captioning. Is it at the bottom of the screen, the top, along the side? This impacts the layout of other elements. I want to share a few basics regarding formatting your visual resources, keeping the deaf aesthetic in mind. First and foremost, reduce the visual noise. Prioritize the visual elements to reinforce your main points. Too much plastered on a slide can be confusing for students. No repeating flashing images or animated GIFs. 1 or 2 flashes is fine. That's the maximum though. Anything continuously repeating is visually distracting and annoying, especially if you consider the deaf student who is trying to attend to the interpreter. They cannot turn away. Consider sightlines and focal points. The presentation of the visual elements should be pleasing and comfortable. A layout that forces the eyes apart or to search for the focal point is uncomfortable and exhausting. When applicable, and to the extent you are able, enlarge the signing space. As mentioned earlier, small movements or changes on the face contain important linguistic information. My guiding principle is one concept, one corresponding image, and one sentence per slide. This allows students to prioritize their focus on the key point and listen to your remarks or watch the interpreter. Speaking on behalf of deaf and deafblind students, they appreciate the fact that instructors pre-record lectures, allowing them the opportunity to review the content more thoroughly, to rewind for missed information, and to create notes. I cannot emphasize enough that captioning must be done by a professional, or the auto-generated captions must be corrected. Auto-generated captions do not provide access to the audio. Auto-generated captions always contain errors, and often the errors are the opposite of what is actually said. Can versus can't. To conclude, this layout is, to borrow an expression from American Sign Language, CHAMP, the best. From the deaf aesthetic, visual-centric point of view, this layout design of the material is clean and clear. The speaker takes half the space and is clearly visible. One key concept is outlined, including an image salient to the accompanying text. Thank you for listening to my presentation.
Thank you so much. I've learned so much. This is the process of learning and relearning. Thank you so much, Dr. Joanne Weber and Tracy Hetman, for the amazing presentation.